Hi everyone, Simon Jacobson here for another episode of Meaningful Live. What the stars say about you. Pisces. This program is dedicated in honor of and with gratitude of our good friend Rick Pug on his birthday. So we're entering into the next constellation, Pisces, which in ancient Latin means fish or fishes, two fish to be exact. So what does it tell us about ourselves, our personalities, our archetype? So we'll take a mystical look at it. The mystics explain that there are two types of souls. We'll call them amphibian souls and land souls. Water souls and land souls. What is the difference between water and land? We all know that beneath the water is plenty of land. There are mountains and valleys and earthquakes and volcanoes, species that are even more in number than on land. The difference is that they're concealed, they're covered up. They're covered up with water. So the mystics explain that the difference between the two, and they use this term, is that water refers to the hidden worlds, and land refers to the revealed worlds. A very basic example would be the difference between thought and speech. When you speak, your words are heard, they're articulated, they're expressed. Others can hear them. It's revealed. Your thoughts are yours and yours alone. There are words there as well, and there are ideas and letters. However, they're all concealed. They're submerged in the power and the energy of your thought, to the point that sometimes you don't even discern and recognize the distinct letters and words. Sometimes you can think in words, but regardless, it's concealed. So essentially, all the objects that exist in the water are submerged in another reality. So the fish in the sea represent creatures that are completely and always submerged, in a sense, sublimated in a reality beyond themselves, to the point that the fish can be even considered to be like water, like the world of thought. The world of speech, on the other hand, though we're dependent on oxygen, and we're also submerged within our oxygen, but it's not quite as obvious. We're walking entities, separate entities, and we've actually developed ways to lift ourselves above the ground through vehicles or other manners, where a fish can never separate itself from the sea. We can separate ourselves from land. We've gone to outer space. We can fly in an airplane. When I say land, I mean the earth, the ground. A fish cannot separate itself from its source, which is another distinction. 1 second that it leaves its life source. Its very life is dependent on it. So how is that representative in our own human psyches and our own souls? That one is a soul who's submerged in the spirit. Another expression, they say, we're not physical beings on a spiritual journey, we're spiritual beings on a physical journey. Water souls are far more cognizant and aware of their spiritual nature. And they actually feel that they're from an ethereal other reality. And that's what they're submerged in. That doesn't mean there's no entity there, where there are actual fish in the sea. But the fish are, think of the psyche of a fish, is completely submerged, completely dissolved and absorbed in something greater than itself. Land souls are also very spiritual, perhaps, but their focus is much more on their distinct identities. So you can say one is dissolved in something beyond, and one is its distinct identity, like the letters of speech, in contrast to the letters of thought. That's why you'll see people who are simply wired that way. They're wired to be more soulful, often poetic, romantic, some would even say naive, dreamers. And there are people who are much more practical. You can say street smart, grounded. This isn't a popularity contest, one better than the other. They both are necessary in this world. But Pisces represents that element. the fish personality. The ability also to be dissolved and absorbed in something beyond you. Some people's egos don't allow them to do that. And we're not talking about an unhealthy ego. Someone who's insecure and is loud and arrogant and aggressive simply to establish their presence. We're talking now in a healthy way. Some people, their identity is very individualistic and they don't easily assimilate and become absorbed in something beyond them. The truth is we all need it. But there are personality types that are more fish-like, and there are personality types that are more land-like. The ultimate goal is bridging the two. And we discussed this in a previous episode of this series, in Aquarius. But here the focus is on the fish in the sea itself. So when we talk about the concept of being fish-like, indeed, it describes certain souls whose lives are like the fish in the sea. That's where they're immersed in. They're immersed in something that is often beyond the regular routine. But we have here two fish. So in some of the descriptions of the two fish, they talk about two fish swimming in opposite directions, somewhat reflecting the two poles of fantasy and reality. Sometimes you dream, but it has to be grounded in reality. Now that makes total sense when you think about it, because even the fish in the sea also need a certain element of grounding. However, when it comes to Pisces, it goes even further than that. It's associated with the attribute of joy. So you may have heard of the month in the Hebrew month of Adar, the month of joy. Now what is joy connected with water, with fish? Well, it's the same idea. And we'll look at it from a different angle. People say often, I'm just not wired to be a happy person. I'm just not joyous. How can you regulate joy? It's an emotion. And the answer is you don't regulate it. All of us have natural joy within us. Do you ever see a child, except under extenuating circumstances or something unnatural, that's unhappy? We're born happy because every soul is by nature like a fish in water. Because joy is the inherent state of our internal superconsciousness, which is like water. It's when we engage with land, when we engage with the forces and the elements of a land-like existence separate from our source, then that consciousness and self-consciousness is what creates the dissonance, which leads us to states that are not joyous and not happy. So joy, if you think about it, when a person is happy, there's no real sensation. We're not talking about necessarily dancing and celebrating. It's just an internal sense of contentment, a sense of joy. You feel you belong. You feel a seamlessness, like a fish in the water. When they say fish in water, everything is working so smoothly, seamlessly. When there's dissonance, there's a disconnect, that's much more in the revealed worlds, where the words can be disconnected from the ideas. So that's why fish in the sea so much are connected to that element of joy, the month of joy. One more point that's critical to make when you're talking about this is that fish are also being submerged. That's why you'll find in the Bible blessings that you should be as multiple as the fish in the sea. Why like the fish in the sea? So the Talmud tells us, because true blessings thrive, blossom, when they're not visible. When they're visible, then they're subject sometimes to another person's resentments or another person's reactions. That's why it's often good to be under the radar when you're blessed. Not just not to create jealousy or envy and so on, but blessings thrive when they're not being looked at precisely, meaning measured and judged and so on. So all of this tells us that we have access to another world, an otherworldly experience. And that's what the Pisces personality is like. Fish in the sea. Now those born in that period, obviously, have that predisposition. But all of us have that aspect. We have to remember that all the signs of the entire year, we all have that. The question is, what is primary? What's the dominant gene, so to speak? What's the dominant predisposition? But everybody needs a Pisces within themselves. Another thing that can be said about the two fish, the concept that Ezekiel in his vision talks about, that energy flows to and fro. Tension and resolution. The fish, two fish going in different directions. Which doesn't mean necessarily opposites. It can mean it's the flow, it's the poles, the two polarities, positive and negative, contraction, expansion, exhale and inhale. So as we experience, just as you think about water, you also think about waves. What is a wave? A wave is essentially like the wave of a heartbeat, of a cardiogram. Is what? Peaks and valleys, ups and downs. It's constant movement. We know a wave is not like a particle. It's a constant fluid movement, a pulsating energy, which is also very much part of the watery personality of Pisces, of the fish. We live so consumed by our five senses that stimulate our vision, our sight, our sound, our taste, touch, and smell. We sometimes forget about that which is more deeply submerged within. We forget about the fish because they're not obvious, they're not visible. But they're there. And each of us has that as a blessing, as a gift. It's our inner treasure. When someone gets to know you, you don't just want to know their external and superficial identity, and you want them to know, you don't want them just to look at you superficially. You want to understand the fish personality. What do you like? Where do you feel that you belong? Where do you feel like you're a fish in water? Seamless. There's an expression in Isaiah, he says, that the world will no longer be, there will no longer be evil and destruction in the world because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. The waters cover the sea. They cover the seabed. Submerged. There's nothing more beautiful than when you feel that you're part of something greater than yourself. That's why it's so beautiful and so harmonious, so comfortable. When you feel nurtured, you go in the water. You ever lie in the water and you just allow yourself to be submerged? Something about it, something nurturing. Of course, it reminds us, consciously or subconsciously or superconsciously, of the 9 months we were in our mother's womb, completely submerged in the embryonic fluids. Because it's a state of attachment, of nurturing, of belonging. That's the fish within each one of us, the Pisces. And the key is to hold on to that and draw from there. To draw from there to the point that we can access that and extend it even into our land activities. And indeed, Pisces is the fourth, the last of the water signs, followed by the previous three, because it's the ultimate picture. It's not just a water carrier, but it's also water itself. So when you ask the question, does water get wet? Can wetness get wet? Does a fish get wet? Think about it. That's a state of being. That's the state of being we want to feel like. A dry hand is submerged in water. A dry thing will get wet. That's where subject and object are experiencing two different entities. There's a certain duality, a dissonance. But when wetness doesn't get wet, it is wetness. So may we all be blessed with having that type of sense of belonging, where you don't feel that isolation, you don't feel that alienation. You feel connected, you feel that you're part of your higher source, and that drives your life. So even when you enter into the worldly, we'll call it earth-like, land-like routines, you can bring that seamlessness and that wholesomeness into every one of your experiences. May each of us be blessed to achieve exactly that. This has been Simon Jacobson. What do the stars say about you? Pisces. Please join me for future such programs. Go to meaningfullife.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share with others. Love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your suggestions, your ideas. Be blessed. Be connected. Be like a fish in the water. And allow that to permeate all your experiences. Thank you.